Good evening. My name is Victoria Tishman Camerzell. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am speaking to you from Livermore, California. I want to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territory of the Confederated Villages of Lishan. I'm going to ask that you please save all your questions for the end of our presentation. I am so excited about our speakers tonight. Both of our presenters are from Californians for Pesticide Reform. Californians for Pesticide Reform is a statewide coalition of more than 190 organizations founded in 1996 to shift the way pesticides fundamentally are used in California. Californians for Pesticide Reform has over 190 member organizations across California, and Angel Garcia is their co-director. Angel joined the organization's core staff in 2017. A Tulare County native, Angel graduated from UCSC with a bachelor's in Latin American and Latino Studies and Politics. He is the founder and coordinator of the local coalition, Tulare County Coalition Advocating for Pesticide Safety. And he's joined tonight by Yanely Martinez, a Monterey County community organizer and Greenfield City Council member. Both her parents worked in the grape fields. Yanely has served her community for more than 5 years as an active volunteer and community leader with the Monterey-based coalition Safe Ag, Safe Schools. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. And now I'm going to turn over the presentation to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and it's good to be here with everyone this evening. Again, Uncle Garcia or Angel Garcia, and just want to also acknowledge that he, him, his pronouns, and that I come into this space as not only as a co-director, but also as a parent of two amazing boys. So this is also something that's very important for me and very close and dear to my heart. The picture there you see there in this opening slide is of me and my first child, my first son. Just really at a chlorpyrifos hearing, and we ended up really calling out the urgency or the lack of action from the Department of Pesticide Regulation at the time, but also on the urgency to address this particular chemical. And it was a moment where it was the first sort of protest that my son attended, and he's attended several since then. But yeah, I just wanted to say that, and I'd like to give space for my colleague as well, Yanely Martinez.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you, everyone that's connecting to hear more about the work that we're doing in California for Pesticides Reform. Yes, council member for the city of Greenfield for almost 7, 8 years now, I believe. I lose track. Being in politics, you lose track of everything. But like Angel mentioned, you know, in the picture there that you see me holding that poster, it's a fight that was not just my fight or my community's fight. It was also the fight of my children. They participate as the models in that picture, that powerful image, because that's the way I envision our communities, you know, all over California, especially our communities of color, that if we don't do nothing about it, if we don't start talking about it and become allies and support, like eventually that's going to be the future of our kids. Our kids are going to have to be playing a normal day out in the park, but wearing gas masks, because everything that's being sprayed around them is not giving them a future. It's not giving them that opportunity to learn like any other children. So again, this is not just my fight, it's the fight for my children and my community of the Central Coast. And I'm excited to be here and share more about the work that we're doing.
Fabulous. Thank you, Yanely. And yes, and so this evening we hope to talk about pesticides in California and also touch on this idea that just because we don't know about it, that doesn't mean that it's not hurting us. I think that's a very important, one of the takeaways that we'd like to for you to leave this evening with. So with that, take it away, compañera.
So pesticides, that's going to be the big topic tonight, right? That's why we all gathered here in this Friday evening. So pesticides are chemicals that are made to kill and damage pests, the bugs and the weeds. Pesticides are applied in huge amounts, like both Angel and I shared, both in the Central Valley and in the Central Coast ag fields. And pesticides are often highly hazardous and toxic, harmful to humans. So pesticides can drip for miles and weeks after application. So that's something that I really want everybody to kind of have that takeaway, that, you know, not just the moment that the pesticides are being applied, it stays in the air. It stays in the air and in the earth and in the water for weeks after the application. So that's something that we should all keep in mind. So weapons on the battlefields, and now they are in our ag fields. Believe it or not, you know, pesticides, the use of pesticides increased after World War I and World War II. Because technically they were biological weapons of war. And now these biological weapons of war that were used out in the fields, or that were used during the war, I mean, are now being used in the fields. And for me, that's mind blowing. Even talking to my 14-year-old and my 15-year-old and other youth that I've been working with here in the city of Greenfield, it's mind blowing that, you know, these pesticides are no longer allowed in the battlefields, but they are allowed without restrictions in our ag fields right next to us in our backyards. That's just mind-blowing. In 1925, there were about 1,700 pesticide products in California. Well, that number grew to 7,000 pesticide products by 1945. So I just want you guys to think about that, the increase and how these weapons of war are being sprayed in our backyards.
And just to also know, and as my colleague mentioned, these were once weapons that were designed for war and now are being used to on crops that goes then to the consumer. But one of the things that I definitely want to highlight here is sort of the narrative behind how this the pesticide use sort of came to be. So for example, this right here, DDT is good for me, is an ad from the past century, but it really just really just illustrates the extent to which pesticide manufacturers went to sort of paint this picture that in this case, DDT was something that was harmless, and then to a certain extent, something almost lighthearted, and something that, as this illustration shows, it's good for the animals, it's good for the vegetables or the fruit, and it's also good for us humans. And so this is something that was real. This is an actual taken from an actual ad from a magazine, and there's all sorts of these type of ads that took place around the time that DDT was really being promoted by the pesticide manufacturers. But with this came, this was then followed by Silent Spring. So Rachel Carson, who I personally admire and just really follow the great work, she was one of the first pioneers on pesticide reform, in the pesticide reform movement. The Silent Spring really showed that DDT in this case was not just harming the targeted pests, but it was also deleterious, or had a deleterious impact on the environment and up to the food chain. And so hence the title Silent Spring, and the birds were no longer singing as they used to. And this work was followed by great pushback from both industry and also pesticide manufacturers. But because Rachel Carson's work was so airtight in terms of the science and the scientific literature behind it, those that oppose her message really didn't have much to work with other than going after Rachel Carson herself. And so this was really one of those points. I just want to highlight this because this year actually marks the 60th anniversary of Rachel Carson's book. And after the publication in 1962, it took more than 10 years to get DDT banned after that, after the release of this book. And it's also really important to note that even after 60 years, her prediction still holds true, that agricultural pesticides do have an impact, not just on the environment, but on us humans.
And I know, like my compañero just mentioned about Rachel Carson, everybody knows about that through school, and everybody found out about this person right here, Cesar Chavez, through the movement, through word of mouth, because you saw him in your community, because your parents spoke about him, and he is literally the pioneer in bringing information forward when it comes to, you know, some things being sprayed out in the fields, and it's killing our farm workers, it's hurting our families, it's making us sick. And as you could see in this picture, I believe this is Cesar Chavez, and this happens to be his last fast. Like, you know, many of his work was fasting. I believe this is the last one, and it lasted about 36 days, I believe. And again, you think about pesticides, you think about the farm workers, you think about the fields, what's happening out there, and you think about Cesar Chavez and the movement with the UFW. And I know that we're going to share a next slide. So for me, this is one of the things that I love to share when it comes to Cesar Chavez. It's something that resonates in every community. And after I'm done reading it, you guys are probably going to think a little bit more about it, but it's the sad reality that we're living in now. So in the old days, miners would carry the birds with them to warn them against poison gas. Hopefully the birds would die before the miners. Sadly, in this year and age that we live now, 2022, farm workers are society's canaries. Farm workers and their children demonstrate the effects of pesticide poisoning before anyone else. And that's coming from Cesar Chavez himself. And this is something that he was quoted on back in 1989. And again, that's the sad reality that, yes, our children of, you know, all over California, of the community of Angel in the Central Valley, and the community of my kids where they're growing up, they are technically the society's canaries. My children are going to get sick before any other person will get sick, before even, you know, the people that are producing these pesticides get sick. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. And so with that came this image. I don't know how many of you that are connected, if you guys have seen these field posting signs, the whole danger, do not enter, peligro, no entrar. We see them all over our communities. I see them every single day out in my community, whether if I'm going for a jog, I'm meeting with somebody at the park, and we have surrounding ag fields, you see those signs. And those signs, I am proud to say that it began with the movement here in Monterey County that we're able to fight just to get those field postings. And it's only been 40 years since they made it happen. And you think about it, only 40 years, but I mean, it all started with people wanting to get together and make a difference and protect one another. And this was the first step, warning our farm workers and anybody else in the surrounding ag fields that there is poison being sprayed in these fields.
And as mentioned by Yanely, this sign, just want to give a little bit more, perhaps a little background. This sign came at the expense of 19 immigrant workers that were exposed to pesticides in Monterey County in 1980. And a year after this, another poisoning case came to be, and this time it involved 41 workers. And this is what helped trigger the field posting ordinance later that year in Monterey County. So what we have here is the first of its kind in the nation at the time, this field posting. And it really, at the end of the day, really showed at the time that we as people, as a community, had more power at the local level, because through the leadership of the local coalition in Monterey County, to name a few, Bill Martinez was also instrumental in this effort. This is what came out of that collective effort at the local level in Monterey County back in in the early 1980s. And so just want to definitely make mention of that. But again, just to touch on the idea that not all this started as some of the pesticides started in the battlefield, and they made it their way into the agricultural fields. And Rachel Carson's work and Cesar Chavez's work really also made the connection that it's not just staying in the fields, but it's also coming into and entering people's bodies and people's health. So yeah, the people of there was a very important case in the people versus Mendocino, 1984. So essentially what happened was that there was busloads of school children that were drifted on by a herbicide application that was 3 miles away. And this happened back in 1977. So what did people do in Mendocino County? They organized, and they really called on their local board of supervisors to pass or do something, take action at the local level. And so they did. They ended up passing an ordinance that prohibited the area application of herbicides in 1979. And not surprisingly, the pesticide manufacturers really pushed back on this. But fortunately for Mendocino County at the time, the state of California upheld the Mendocino County's authority to ban area applications in court. So there was a legal battle that was won in court in 1984. And so this really marked and really highlighted how local power was really instrumental to really protect people at the time. And this victory was a moment where the California Supreme Court really allowed for local community to adopt stronger regulations than what the state or federal governments had at the time. And so that's like, this is one of the last moments where the people of California, the people that live in all the counties up and down the state, had real power at the local level. And then came preemption.
Preemption. There we go, compañero. So I hear it all the time as a council member, especially being so vocal about pesticide reform up and down my county and nationwide, because I love to go out and meet other elected officials from, across the nation. I hear it all the time. Well, you being a council member and being in a position of power, aren't you allowed or aren't you able to do a difference? And this is where I, direct their attention to the preemption. So section 11501.1 of California Food and Agriculture Code states, no ordinance or regulation of local government, including myself, but not limited to an action by a local government agency or department, a county board of supervisors, or a city council, or a local regulation adopted by the use of an initiative measure may prohibit or in any way attempt to regulate any matter relating to the registration, sale, transportation, or use of pesticides. And in any of these ordinances, laws, or regulations are void and of no force or effect. So this is what I relate them back to. My hands are tied. we were stripped out of our power, not just as a council member, but school board, supervisors. There's really little work we could do. We have a voice, we have a platform, we could use that. But when it comes to making regulation, putting, ordinances in place, we really don't have any power. And it goes back to this. So we're able to make a difference when it comes to protecting our city within our city itself, like the parks, banning glyphosate, schools banning glyphosate from their school campuses, but that's pretty much it. I cannot enforce my community residents to do what I want them to do to eliminate the use of pesticides. I could only do so little when it comes to being, a local elected official. So I just wanted to share that because I know I get it all the time, and probably some of you were thinking, well, aren't you a council member? Can't you do something about it? But we are stripped out of our power.
Just to also highlight, as my colleague mentioned, yes, I mean, this code, this language here really just laid the groundwork for state preemption that, as mentioned, took away the power at the local level and really concentrated it in Sacramento. So after that Mendocino case came to be, and after the state Supreme Court upheld the people's right to local ordinances when it came to pesticides, the industry and the pesticide manufacturers descended upon Sacramento and really pushed for this right here to be implemented. And so that's what we have at the moment. And that is why oftentimes we find ourselves having to go to Sacramento and really be in that space as opposed to keeping or staying with our local county board of supervisors, or because there really is a lot of the power when it comes to pesticides is in Sacramento. And then just a quick overview. So this state preemption just essentially gives authority for pesticides to the following three: state legislature, and then oftentimes whenever a bill that involves pesticide to any extent really dies in ag communities in Sacramento. And then there's also the Department of Pesticide Regulation, which is a division of the Cali PA, and they are the ones that can enact some sort of law that can then be enforced by the local county agricultural commissioner. So every county in the state of California, with the exception of one, which shares one ag commissioner with another, every county has a designated ag commissioner who is tasked with enforcing whatever pesticide law comes out of the state legislature or out of the Department of Pesticide Regulation. And mind you, this is to enforce, not to necessarily enact any sort of local pesticide ban. So that's also important to know when addressing or really talking about pesticides, and why isn't that we go to our local board of supervisors or local decision makers to really address some of the most dangerous or hazardous pesticides, if they're that dangerous. It just really goes back to state preemption.
And one thing that I just want to add, Angel, is the fact that we still have the power. Every single person that's watching and that's connecting and it's going to be watching this recording, we still have the power within ourselves, because we need to make sure who we are voting for as state representatives when it comes to our assembly members and state senators, because again, a lot of these bills die in these committees and we're able to advocate for them. So at least making that right decision, informing yourself who you vote, who you put in office, could make a huge difference in every single community throughout the state of California.
And so with the state preemption, essentially is another way of looking at it is weak pesticide regulation. So oftentimes we'll hear, well, we have, or California has the most stringent pesticide regulations in the nation. And we have something that no other state in the country has. But to put it into perspective, I mean, California does use a lot of pesticides. millions of pounds of pesticides. And so it just makes sense that because we use so much of it, we should also at least be up to the task of being the best at regulating them, since it's just so much of it. And the other thing is, add to that the public health risks that agricultural pesticides pose onto communities. And so, just to say that overall, yes, the state preemption just really weakens the pesticide regulation. And again, when it comes to most stringent, I mean, that really is a very low standard. There are many counties in California that use pesticides that are banned altogether in other countries. In fact, there was a study that came out, or a piece that was published by Pesticide Action Network, and it found that the US ranks 34th in the world at banning health hazardous pesticides. 34th. That really puts it into perspective as to how much work needs to be done here in the US, but also in California, where a lot of the pesticide use is heavily concentrated.
And here you could see some of the pesticide types. We have the organophosphates, which basically are connected to causing harm in the nervous system, lung damage, and more. The fumigants, again, cancer, lung damage. The neonicotinoids that affect the bees and the butterflies. And then we have others, including glyphosate, also known as Roundup, and paraquat. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Angel, that I might miss.
Yeah, no, I think, colleague, you know that, Yanely. I mean, organophosphates, when we talk about organophosphates, we're talking about chemicals like chlorpyrifos, which maybe some of you might have come across in some articles in these past few years, or meliathon, or maybe chlorpyrifos. Chlorpyrifos, by the way, was part of that little ad that was we had in our slide earlier on, but it was essentially a biological, or it was used in the battlefield. And then there's also Telone. It's a fumigant as well that's used heavily in the Central Coast and the strawberry fields. I mean, our bees and butterflies are also being heavily impacted by the nicotinoids. And as my colleague mentioned, I mean, glyphosate has also been found to be linked to cancer, and it's often found in Roundup as well as other weed killers. So, I mean, this is not an all-inclusive list. I mean, the list is the universe of the pesticide universe is very, very large and wide. And but this is just some of the most common or more some of the more concerning ones that come to mind. And a lot of times these are they can come in different market names as well. So chlorpyrifos is actually the active ingredient, but the actual market name, or if someone were like to go to a pesticide place, store, I mean, they can mention chlorpyrifos. It is the active ingredient, but it might be under a different market name. So there's a market name, but these are chlorpyrifos, chlorpyrifos, imidacloprid, glyphosate. Those are all the active ingredients. And in the case of glyphosate, for example, Roundup would be the market name. That's the name of the product itself that you can just buy off the shelf at a local hardware store or something.
And this is the science that supports a lot of the information that we're bringing forward. And if any of you want, the studies or links to the studies, we would be more than glad to send it your way. So just let us know in the chat box, or maybe let Victoria know, and we would gladly send that information forward. But we do have studies done like Columbia University, UC Davis, UC Berkeley's Chamaco study, and UCLA have done major studies, which basically talks about the prenatal exposure exposure to tiny amounts. We're talking of not about big quantities, but tiny amounts that over the time of, being exposed, it's linked to higher incidence of nerve damage, ADHD, IQ loss, autism, lung damage, and cancers. And just to talk about chamacos a little bit about that, I know a lot of the community members in my city where I live in Greenfield were actually followed, and they're continuing to be followed. These young little babies, they were followed since they were in their mom's womb, and mom was exposed to pesticides working out in the fields. Now they're, I would say, in their early 20s, 24, and now the study chamacos wants to do like another extension where they want to be not only analyzing the child itself, now the child of that child, because now they're becoming parents themselves, they're having little ones. So we want to continue to know, if they're still exposed in one way or another, what's the aftermath of all this exposure. So I just wanted to share that with you all. Anything that I might miss, Angel, because I love to talk and I add things here and there.
No, I think you did. Yeah, I think you definitely touched on that. I mean, that the Nation article really highlighted organophosphates here, and Colombia and the Chamaco study were really instrumental in really uplifting the link between organophosphates and IQ loss, ADHD, and the ones that are listed there. But yeah, I mean, and this is, and mind you that this is a chemical that was recently being phased out in California, chlorpyrifos, even though the Department of Pesticide Regulation really didn't move as concerned communities would have liked. And but again, just to Yanely's point, that the step preemption is not should not be discouraging us. In fact, it should be just something to know when we're working on addressing pesticide exposure. But in no way it should be like a deterrence, because as Yanely mentioned, I mean, this is about public health. This is about the consumer, and this is about the farm workers as well. So we're all interconnected, and it's important to really see that connection as a broad community. So real quick, and to continue on the research on pesticides in children in California, specifically on children in California, there are two that I would like to just briefly highlight. One is a UCLA. UCLA is a Fielding School of Childhood Cancer. It's a study that looked at 2020 and 2021 and found that 13 pesticides that were linked to specific childhood cancers if the mother happened to live within 2.5 miles of an application when pregnant. Yeah, just how it sounds, it's really alarming. And and communities also refer to this as a toxic 13. And these 13 pesticides linked to childhood cancers increase risk from between 1.5 to 3 times. For people that, for mothers that lived within 2.5 miles of applications that were of the 13, of any of the 13. And then there's the UC Berkeley Chamaco study. And then UC Berkeley, the Chamaco study is a longitudinal study, and it's been instrumental in also really highlighting the long-term impact of pesticides in farm working communities. Specifically, I think the focus has been the Salinas Valley. And what they found in a study in 2017 was that for every 522 pounds roughly of organophosphates applied within a kilometer of a pregnant woman, her child tended to lose more than 2 IQ points than mothers that didn't. And that's, and the study also found that there were 15 schools in Monterey County alone that had between 606 and 957 pounds applied in 2016 within a kilometer. And so we're talking about IQ loss here. And this is something that's hits home for a lot of farm workers because oftentimes in our outreach to farm working families, one of the main drivers behind them waking up at 3, at 4 in the morning is not because they like waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning. Their drive is because they don't want their child to have to go through what they're going through. They don't want their child to have to be out in the fields. They want them to get an education and do better in life. But yet, studies like these really reveal sort of the disproportionate impact, the long-term, lifelong impact that pesticides can have. We're talking about IQ points, IQ loss. And so it really puts it into perspective to the extent to which California children are really being impacted negatively. But there's also great hope. I mean, I also want to say that because in this picture right here, we have one of Yanely's kids who is giving a speech right there.
The 4.
And the four of her kids are there in that picture, and they're at a press conference and they're advocating because they want a future as well. And I don't know, Yanely, you want to share a little bit about that, but I mean, I think that leaves us with great hope as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, Angel, for mentioning that, for acknowledging my children. I think that if anybody that is watching probably questions themselves, like, why is Yanely and Angel talking about this, or why are they so involved, or why are they bringing all this information forward, is that we have everything to lose. Angel has 2 babies. I have 4 babies that you see here in the picture that are affected with chlorpyrifos, and, you know, when it was being sprayed here in our community. And not only that, now when at the end, you're going to hear more about our campaign, but Victor, the one you see there holding the mic, he started with the whole pesticide movement, not just because mom was forcing him or he wanted the spotlight, but because pesticides affected him. And it didn't affect him, you know, at home where mom could have protected him. He literally was exposed to pesticides at school that caused an asthma attack. That's why his passion and his drive to get involved and just wanting to communicate with others that if it's happening to me, it's happening to your son. It's going to continue to happen unless we put a stop to it.
And so when it comes to the impact on children, but also I also want to bring to, I'd like to bring your attention to cancer-causing pesticides in California. And what does that look like? So here is a brief sort of graph that was taken from state data. And really, the graph just illustrates what, I mean, they just speak louder than words, really. There's been a gradual increase of carcinogenic pesticides over a period of time in California. So even though there's been phase outs of certain chemicals, there's also introductions into the market of chemicals under different configurations that are essentially the same thing. And what we have here is just the some pounds of carcinogenic pesticides that are being sprayed and or are being used in the state of California. Sorry.
So I want all of you to think right now, what does environmental justice mean to you, to the community, to anybody? What is environmental justice? Well, I'm going to read what the Department of Pesticide Regulation states in their website, what their meaning of environmental justice is. Treating people fairly, guides how DPR conducts its activities. Conducts its activities. Fair treatment means that no one group of people, including racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic groups, should be disproportionately impacted by pesticides. And that's according to the Department of Pesticide Regulation. So I just want you to think a little bit of what you have heard up to now. And after hearing what the statement that directly comes from the website of DPR. And I know my colleague Angel has a little bit more information on the father of environmental justice himself regarding what DPR just mentioned.
So juxtaposing like this definition by the state and with Robert Bullard, who's considered the father of environmental justice. I mean, there recently came out a study that found that pesticide was the pollution burden that showed the greatest racial, ethnic, and income disparities in the state. This is more than multiple air pollutants and other toxic releases. So it just really puts it into perspective, the issue of pesticides in the realm of environmental injustice. And this right now really is what's going on. There is no real environmental justice if we are to look at the history and where this stuff is happening, but rather, as Yanely mentioned, there's an injustice that's ongoing. And real quick, I want to really follow up that with the following. So we extrapolated data from the Department of Pesticide Regulations website. And what we found was that, and we also took census data, and we looked at the top Latino counties in the state, and there are 11 of them that have over 50% of its overall population Latino or Latinx. And then we also looked at the least Latinx counties in the state, and there are roughly 25 of them that have less than 24% of its overall population, county population, be Latin or Latino, Latinx or Latino. And just want to bring your attention to a few things here. First, when we look at the top or the most Latino Latinx counties, when it comes to cancer-causing ag pesticide use in those counties, if we were to add all the 11 counties, and again, we're talking about roughly the same population. We're talking in the 11 counties, if we add the population there, we're looking at 5.8 million population-wise. And if we add the top 20 or the least Latinx Latino population or counties, we're also looking at roughly 6.2 million in terms of population. So we're roughly same, more or less, in terms of population. Now, when it comes to pesticide use, however, in the in most Latino or Latinx counties, cancer-causing pesticide use in those counties is at combined is 24.6 million pounds, and we juxtapose that with the other county or the other group of counties, and that's down to 1.9 million pounds of pesticides. So there's a major discrepancy there in terms of how much cancer-causing ag pesticides are being used. And this is from 2017 data. If we look at the reproductive and developmental toxic and agricultural pesticide use, again, we go to the most Latino counties or Latinx counties. We're looking at roughly 10 million. We go to the least Latino or Latinx counties, we're looking at 1 million. Again, major discrepancy in terms of like the pounds of pesticides used in those counties. And now, if just one last thing, if we look at the acute pesticide-related illnesses, which by the way, we have major suspicion that this is major underreporting or going on, because to begin with, in our ongoing outreach in the different counties where we have presence, we still come across people that do not know of the existence of the Agricultural Commissioner's Office. And the Agricultural Commissioner's Office is the local county authority when it comes to pesticide regulation and enforcement. And so a lot of people don't even know that such office exists in their respective county. So with that in mind, if they were potentially exposed, there is also a good possibility that this might go unreported. So with that in mind, I also want to bring your attention to this acute pesticide related illnesses. And for the most Latin or Latino counties, we're looking at 504 cases, more or less. If we look at the other group of counties, we are at 125. So even then, with this major underreporting, and this, we still see a discrepancy there. And so it's one of those things that really really just confirms and corroborates what Robert Bullard found in his recent study this year, and that there's a certain population that's being disproportionately impacted by pesticides in the state of California. And let's see, next slide here. So just to succinctly put it, an average person who lives in the most Latinx or Latino counties, compared to the other group of counties, is 4 times more likely to suffer from an acute pesticide illness, would live in an area that has 14 times more carcinogenic agricultural pesticides, and would be living in a county where there are 11 times more agricultural pesticides listed as reproductive and developmental toxicants applied per person. So again, these are figures that are taken right off state data. This is not something that was obtained from some obscure source. So just want to definitely highlight that this is something that we can look up and see that this is what's being reported and what the state has in their hands at the moment. And so that is to say that, but I also want to highlight Yanely's point, and that is not all is lost. I mean, yes, there is disproportionate use and disproportionately use of pesticides that happens more in like Latino or Latinx heavy regions, but that hasn't deterred CPR and other allies up and down the state to really bring change despite of these potential challenges. So Yanely?
Yes, so we've been fighting back in California. And when I say fighting back, it doesn't mean like physical fights. It means fighting with, the most important thing that we have, and that's our voice. And what I love about CPR is that we as organizers, we get to work with these members sometimes like every week on a day-to-day basis. It depends on just the member itself. But you create leaders that are willing to step up and attend the council meetings, attend the supervisory meetings, the school board meetings, and ride with us all the way to Sacramento to have our voices heard. And with this, it comes successful victories that we've had. It took a while, but they're partial victories in the recent fights that we've had. And so one of them that we've mentioned throughout this presentation has been brain harming chlorpyrifos that got canceled in 2020. We have the other one, which is the school buffer zones in 2018. We have Roundup bans in 2016 all the way through 2020 that have happened in different cities with all the different organizers that have been working with school board members and council members just to be able to make these victories happen. And so I think that, after having these small victories, for us, we consider them huge. Each member feels that they're empowered, that, their voices and their actions matter. And if we need to go to Sacramento again to fight anything else, we will be there in Sacramento. So for me, I consider them huge victories. I don't know if I forgot anything else to mention, Angel, regarding our victories, but I just see the pictures and they make me smile of all our organizers mixed together. I know we have here from Angel's area, and then we have one from our area, and they just come together and they unite for one purpose, and it all leads back to pesticide reform.
Absolutely. And I think that, this is just to simply say that there's challenges, there's state preemption, but even amidst such hurdles, people are still organizing, people are still uniting, people are still mobilizing, and people are still bringing about change. One of them is this, yes, as mentioned, I mean, this chlorpyrifos cancellation or phase out in the state of California. And this is a recent, one of our most recent victories in the state. The school buffer zones. I mean, this is something that before every county was at their discretion to see how much protection they wanted to give their public school children and daycare centers. But now everyone has a similar same buffer zones around them. Obviously, there's some that can provide even more than that, but that's the minimum. And so this is again a quarter mile from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. We do recognize that there are things that can be improved on that, and we definitely feel that we need that needs to be addressed too. But that doesn't take away from the fact that people organize and really push for this to even happen. And then also, as mentioned, the roundup bans. I mean, people have been organizing within their school districts to really update the integrated pest management programs in the school districts. This has looked in the form of people asking school districts to replace glyphosate or even synthetic pesticides, or exclude them from their integrated pest management plan, and instead replace them with non-toxic alternatives. And so that's also been these have been very successful campaigns at the local level, but they haven't been easy. But because people come together, and that's the strength of these type of efforts, is when people come together and unite, because at the end of the day, we all want health. We all want healthy communities, healthy children, and we overall just want a healthy California. And so that's really a very unifying goal that we all have. And I think that that's something that really has been critical in a lot of these efforts. This is not about a particular, or at the end of the day, this is about just a public health issue. This is about ensuring that kids have a better future. And so that starts today. It doesn't start tomorrow. And so this is one way of contributing to that overall vision. And let's see real quick. And then this is, Yanely, I don't know if you have a little info on that picture.
That picture, I believe, was in the Watsonville area, and it was during our School Buffer Zones 2018 campaign. So you see teachers and parents participating, or even allies. I mean, you don't have a child in the school system, but you want to be a part of, you have them there. You have them be part of the movement. And so now we're going to move into stop pesticide secrecy, right? That's what we want. And so I know that I'm going to put my compañero on the spot and make them take over, but I know that I'm going to be sharing as well, because I get it all the time. And I know that this same question is going to come up to several of the members that might be listening in, or people that are going to watch the recording is, well, what is it that you guys want? What do you mean when you say stop pesticide secrecy? What do you mean when you say you want notifications now? Well, remember how I shared earlier the picture and Angel pointed out my son Victor? My son Victor was exposed to pesticide exposure in the middle school that he was attending. It was a severe case that ended up with him being transported to the emergency room. And I didn't know what was happening. And so that's the thing, that with this notification campaign, we want to know ahead of time what's being sprayed. So me as a mother, as a community community leader, as a community organizer, can inform the community how to better protect themselves. And the thing is that we don't know what's being sprayed until after the situation happens or after the pesticides are being applied. And just to give you guys a little bit of background, after I asked for the report on the day of my son's pesticide exposure, it took a month until I was able to get those results. And it was just a lot of scientific language that I didn't even understand. And it was hard to get somebody to be able to help me read this information if it wasn't for the great team that CPR provides. And so when we read exactly what was being sprayed, 10 chemicals were sprayed at 4 a.m. that morning. And when my son went into this asthma attack because of the pesticides, it was roughly around 1 in the afternoon. So see how far and how long these pesticides remain in the air. And out of those 10 pesticides that were sprayed that day, 7 induced asthma attacks. So that's why it's important. It's not just my fight, it's the fight of many mothers with children with asthma, is that we have that right. We deserve the right to know what's being sprayed so we could better protect ourselves. If I knew ahead of time, if I had that information, that knowledge, I wouldn't have let my son go to school that day. I would have kept him in home, learning, doing his work through the computer, packets, you name it. But it's my job as a mom to be able to prepare my son for life. And so that's basically where we're at now with the whole, notification campaign. And I will turn it to you, compañero.
Yeah, thank you. So as my colleague mentioned, I mean, this is something that hits home for a lot of us, especially for parents. What we want at the end of the day is we want to be able to provide a safe space, a safe environment for our children. And for those that that also are part of the social fabric of the community. I mean, we all want a healthy environment at the end of the day. But sometimes, as mentioned before, this stuff, again, we are in a state that uses the most pesticides than any other in the nation. But at the same time, we are also a state that we don't actually get advanced, or we are not able to get information ahead of time so we can take precautions, because that just isn't happen right now. And so because of community residents wanting to know and exercise their right to know, so to be able to take precautions, as in the case of Yanely, there is a growing effort to ask that this information be transparent and be more available to the public. Insofar, what we have right now is a weak and a slow regulatory system. It's weak in the sense that some of these pesticides are still being allowed to be used in close proximity to on our food and in close proximity to the farm workers, but also slow in the sense that this is Yanely should have access to that information and not have to wait a whole month before getting any of that. And so this one of the ways to address this is by really stopping and making this pesticide information more transparent, more available. And so that, thanks to the effort of several community leaders throughout the state of California started a notification started the development of a statewide pesticide notification system that is scheduled to sort of launch July of 2024. In our perspective, that's just simply too long to have to wait. And insofar, the thing that's going on right now is that, remember those ag commissioners? They actually received notices from growers about plant applications of the most hazardous pesticides ahead of time. And what we're demanding in the immediate is that, since they already have this information at their disposal, they should make this or web post this stuff, so people have access to the information for those that want to take a proactive approach to protecting their health. And so with this whole process that the state started, right now we are in a public comment period. on the state pesticide notification system. And this ends next Friday, July 15th, or it ends July 15th. So we really encourage this evening to everyone that's listening, and if you leave out of this with an action item, you have an opportunity to shape and really contribute to making pesticide information of the most hazardous ones more transparent. And so what exactly is it that we want, though? So as Yanely mentioned, we want a full transparent public website at minimum that is available without any anyone having to sign up. No sign up requirements. Yanely?
Okay. So you want me to take it over from here, compañero? Okay, so we want that full transparent web-based system without having to register, right? And like we mentioned, the whole conversation and a lot of questions that come up is why not register? Like when you want to get that public information. Well, a lot of our communities live in fear. And they don't trust government agencies, and that's the sad reality that we live in. We've had, several cases in the news where information has been leaked out and it's been shared, and so we want a transparent website where people could just, sign up on their own and don't have to give any personal information. Just make it as transparent and public as possible. You want me to do the next one, compañero?
Sure, yeah.
So we also want phase in parts. We don't want to wait until 2024. And I know that that's part of the conversation that Angel had mentioned in the beginning, is that for us to wait until 2024 is too long. Why can't we just start by phases? And so that's something that we want, and we want your support. Everybody that's watching, please send these requests to DPR so we could know ahead of time and let DPR know that more people are getting involved with the cost and more people understand that it is our right to know. So besides phasing it out in parts and not waiting into 2024, we also want to create opt-in alerts through email or text. We want notification to have information in multiple languages, not just limited to Spanish and English. I know with this, I talk about my community of Greenfield. It's 93% Latino, but out of that 93% population, we have a 50% indigenous population. So if I was to get this notification system, just including Spanish and English, it would really be very limited and it would leave many of my community members out. So we want other languages, including Mixteco, Zapoteco, Triqui, as many languages that are needed throughout our community. And we also want to have included where these pesticide applications will happen. We want maps, we want graphs, and we want that safety data. We also want DPR establish a community working group that is made up of community members throughout the state of California that could work alongside DPR to make sure that this program is implemented correctly with the feedback of the community. And we also want included, I know this is part of our wish list, but we would want to be notified 72 hours in advance. And I know that some people might be hesitant to say why 72 hours. Well, we're requesting at least 72-hour notice, but at least to get that notification ahead of time, because like I shared with the story of my son, if I would have had that information prior to him attending school, it would have been a whole different story. And then lastly, we want notifications about other harmful pesticides beyond the restricted ones that they want to include, like Prop 75. We also want to know about, other pesticides that have been addressed and identified by the scientists. I don't know, did I forget anything, compañero? I'm just passionate to hopefully connect with every single one of you and make sure that you're sending in that written email. Even you could mail it in if you're you're not comfortable with emailing, but please make sure to help us out because our deadline is next week, like Angel mentioned, Friday the 15th, but we want as many people to connect, to send their emails in, even community members that might think, well, I don't live next to an ag field. How is this going to affect me? Why should I even care? Why should they care, compañero?
I mean, I think that's a good, I mean, we really are an interconnected community. We all are consumers to an extent. And so this is something that not just impacts the person that harvests the fields, but it's also something that gets to the table of the person that eats that fruit or that vegetable. Or and so I think that this we have to approach one of the ways of approaching this is by really recognizing that we are all one big sort of interconnected web. And if one part of that chain is affected and impacted negatively, then it gets, all of it gets disrupted. And then we also have a due diligence to each other of really wanting to contribute to an overall better environment. And I think that that's really important. And then I think another very important point is that it's really important to be supportive of these efforts, because this is not just about a particular to Central Valley or Central Coast. This is also an issue that unless we start addressing the way that we are growing food and the way that we're treating our environment and the way that we are letting these pesticides, synthetic pesticides, impact our bodies, I mean, this is going to keep spreading. And so this is one way of really bringing attention to the potential harm that this will bring in the long run. This is very important to really take that into account. And back to these points, I mean, so essentially, yes, you know, there are pesticides that are really dangerous that, you know, we need to like address them in the immediate, but one of the ways of also addressing pesticide reform or doing pesticide reform is by really making these pesticides visible. And this is one way of doing that. Pesticides, I mean, as it is, you know, it's something that in some communities, because it happens so often, it's just sort of becomes normalized. But in other areas, because it's sort of the dominant or sometimes that narrative that sort of is like the dominant narrative, if you will, seems to be like we have to be dependent on these pesticides to grow food. And well, I think that one way of starting to address that is by really knowing what is exactly is being sprayed around us and how's this impacting us. And so this is one starting point to addressing that. And again, we want something fully transparent. We want this now, not until 2024, but now, and do it in phase-ins if it needs to be. And the other thing is location. Insofar, what the state is proposing is that the location be a square mile. So if you live from a mile away from a pesticide application, you will be notified. That is what the state is proposing, but you won't know exactly which the coordinates or the location of the actual application. Why is that important? Well, it's really important because that would help to better avoid those particular sites. A square mile can go in any direction. And so that leaves it really to sort of a guessing game. I mean, where exactly within that square mile is it being sprayed? And so we really want a precise location. The other thing is text, email alerts. These are options to this web-based system. We recognize that some might prefer text, and we recognize that others might prefer email. But why not have these as options that can be available to that person, and depending on that person's preferences, have those readily available. Restricted materials. I mean, restricted materials are those that are the most hazardous pesticides used in agriculture. And to use these pesticides, because they're so hazardous, in order to use them, you got to have some sort of training or some sort of approval or permit from the ag commissioner's office because of their toxicity. And so we want these pesticides, all the restricted material pesticides included at a bare minimum. And also multiple languages, as mentioned. I mean, we are in California where there are over 40, 50, I forget the exact number, but several dozens of languages being spoken. And so in the case of a Mexican indigenous population, I mean, that is it's not a written language. So that's also very important to take into account. So when we say multiple languages, we're also referring to culturally appropriate ways of getting this information out. Maps, visuals, I mean, we want to be able to pull out our phones and just, as we do with any sort of alert systems, be able to just zoom in and see where exactly the application will take place. Why? Because we want to be able to take a proactive stance. We want to be able to avoid those locations. We want to be able to just not have to drive through them. We want to be able to, if our neighbor, or I have family that they live across the state and a family member wants me to assist them with this, I should be able to like assist them with them, because it is their right if they want to exercise and take a proactive approach to making sure that they're not being or going into a space that's going to be spraying pesticides. 72-hour advance notice. That's what we want. I mean, we understand that sometimes these applications might not even take place. That's okay. But having that information ahead of time is going to be helpful. And then a permanent committee of community residents so that we can help plan and adjust the system as we go along to make sure that the system works for all of us, and make sure the system that's has the Californians input into it. And so we want this to be a permanent sort of a committee of community residents. And so this is something that we are asking to the Department of Pesticide Regulation as they're developing their system. So again, these are the points. We can definitely send these around, and we would definitely welcome any support that can come not our way, because this is not our campaign. This is not CPR's campaign. This is everyone's campaign, because we all have a right to know. And so that is, in summary, what we were hoping to really channel this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity, Victoria, for the invitation. And Yanely, any last thoughts?
No, just thank you for the opportunity, Victoria, and everybody else that stayed connected. Thank you for staying connected and listening to this wonderful presentation. I think it's wonderful. I hope every single one of you learned something new, or at least know that Angel and I are available if you want our emails, if you want to connect in one way or another. But I love the way Angel brought closure to our presentation, that this is not just our fight. It's not just my fight or Greenfield's fight. It's the fight of everybody in the state of California that really want to ensure that our kids have a future. So thank you for this opportunity. I know it's a Friday night. We could have been doing something else, but hey, we were talking about environmental justice and how we can all do our part to make sure that we secure a future for our little ones.
And, you know, and I just want to end with this quote that just really, like, it might be a little cliche, but but it still hits home every time for me. And it reminds me of sort of our interconnectedness, and it's the whole notion that alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. And that's so true. I mean, Yanely and I here tonight, it's not just us two. With us, we have a network of farm workers and labor and educators and youth and just this whole intergenerational group of people behind this effort. And tonight, we want to invite everyone here to also join us. This is an opportunity to contribute to this overall vision of leaving a better environment and future than it was before. And we can do that. And I believe we can do that. But it's going to take all of us here tonight, and those of us that weren't able to join. But with that, I'd like to thank again everyone here, and Victoria and the Sierra Club for this invitation and the space. And so Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both for a phenomenal, very informative, very moving presentation. We have a lot of really good comments in the chat, a lot of folks thanking you for your time. I really appreciate how you gave us so much information, but you also gave us some real tangible takeaways about things that we can actually do to potentially move the needle. So just in case, folks are wondering if they do want to share their comments about the pesticide notification system, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yes, we can definitely send over the actual email and link that people can use to submit a public comment. Yeah, we'll definitely provide that along, Victoria, and we can circulate that for sure.
Thank you so much. Yanely, it was so moving to see your children, being advocates for the same issue, and also to hear your son's story. As a parent, for the fellow parents that are listening in, what are some next steps that we all can take for to better our kids' future and limit their access to pesticides?
I think as a mother, just informing our children. I mean, it's sometimes we as a mom want to protect the children from the good and the bad. And like I always tell my kids, there's good and evil everywhere in every community and every state that we move to. But just as long as you're keeping them informed of what's going on, what are the reality of things, I mean, and letting them know that you have the power within yourself to have that voice and to speak up. And like I mentioned, I would hope that my children become these great doctors and politicians in the future. But for right now, the reality is like, I just want them to be good, caring human beings that care enough to protect themselves, but the community, neighboring communities. And it starts with this. It starts with, speaking up, attending workshops, getting more information, and this is what I love about CPR, that it's a beautiful organization where we allow families to come together, because we know that a lot of parents don't have the need, the money to be able to pay for childcare, and they're allowed to bring their little ones along. And so they hear the stories, we hear the stories, and it just becomes a beautiful family. But as a mom, just keep your children involved and let them know that, yes, this might not be happening within your community. It might not affecting you, but just as long as you participate and you do any little thing that you could do, for instance, just sending this email to DPR, that makes a huge difference.
Very inspiring. And I just want to read one of the comments in the chat. It suggests that you both should run for a California state office. I have to second that one. Very, very moving. Thank you both, like truly, for your advocacy, for making time tonight, like truly grateful.
I really want to say thank you just to everybody that really listened to us, and yes, let's make it happen. Let's send those emails and let's get the work done, right, Angel?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is, we can only do so much, but if we have other allies, we have other support, and join also. And I mean, there's no telling the power that we can create collectively. And yeah, I just want to really echo what my colleague mentioned. I mean, this also starts within our families. And as mentioned before, I mean, I think that we have, I see myself as really having a responsibility to not just my family, but also to my community. And that's what also really keeps me going.
On that note, thank you both. And if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I have my email, but I'm sorry, and Angel, he's my boss, he's gonna get me in trouble. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I do remember my phone number, and you guys can reach out to my work number. Again, I leave me a voicemail if I don't answer, send me a text, because I know a lot of kids nowadays, or a lot of youth, it's just easier to send a text. But my phone number is 831-201-9151. Once again, 831-201-9151. And I'll make sure that I'll send you a text with my email. I promise, Angel, I'm gonna learn my email. But please reach out, and I know Angel is gonna give his information as well, but if you want more information or you just wanna know how you could get involved with the movement, reach out.
And I see, Angel, that you put, that was really helpful. You put the email addresses in the chat. Thank you so much. Angel@pesticidereform.org, Yanely at pesticidereform.org. And again, that number is 831-201-9151. Again, thank you both. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you again, and hope you everyone here enjoys the rest of their evening.
Thank you. Good night.